How do you think we conceptualize forest revival in our heritage?
Actually, our ancient Indian culture and civilization talks a great deal about environment, environmental conservation, preservation, and restoration. And the emphasis on forest has always been very good. The Atharva Ved calls Prithvi Vishwasya Dharitram, which means the sustainer and nurturer of the entire world. The Aranyani Sukta of the Rig Veda praises the forest goddess Aranyani for beauty and abundance. At the same time, it warns against careless felling of trees because they are essential to life. The Prithvi Sukta of the Atharva Ved expresses an earnest desire for fertile lands by invoking the earth's forests, mountains, and water bodies as sources of well-being. They all have shaped our civilization's profound and interconnected idea of forest and environment. So the Vedic tradition depicts nature in divine terms, portraying the trees as guardian-like protectors and Prithvi as our nurturing mother.
Namaste viewers. Welcome to today's segment of the podcast with Bharat Ki Soch. I am Tejasvi Shukla, Assistant Director for Research, and we have gathered here for a very important segment on a contemporary issue of great relevance. Before we start, to briefly introduce this think tank, we are focused on research work of rediscovering ancient Indic wisdom and trying to address contemporary realities and issues from the heritage that we carry from millennia ago. Our research work focuses on 6 pillars of extreme importance, ranging from governance, economy, commerce and finance, health, well-being and nutrition, sustainability and national security, as well as agriculture and food security. And in today's segment, we have with us Senior Research Fellow for Bharat Ki Soch, Dr. Abhishek Anand. Thank you, Abhishek, for joining us today. And he will be answering a lot of questions that make us deal with the dilemmas of urbanization and deforestation that sort of seem to be very interlinked. Abhishek, what do you think our ancient Indic wisdom really says about that? How do you think we conceptualize forest revival in our heritage? How do you think?
Actually, our ancient Indian culture and civilization talks a great deal about environment, environmental conservation, preservation, and restoration. And the emphasis on forest has always been very good. So as we know that Bharat is not only a modern nation state, it is one of the world's oldest civilizations with a continuum of ethos that entails and encompasses all aspects of life and existence, including the environment. The Vedas as our earliest literature, our epics Ramayana and Mahabharata, then the Dharmashastras as the compendia of social and individual conduct, and texts of distinct authorship such as Kautilya's Arthashastra and Manusmriti, they all have shaped our civilization's profound and interconnected idea of forest and environment. So the Vedic tradition depicts nature in divine terms, portraying the trees as guardian-like protectors, the forests as living entities deserving of respect, and the earth as our nurturing mother, Prithvi as our nurturing mother. So in one of the verses, the Atharva Ved calls Prithvi Vishwasya Dharitram, which means the sustainer and nurturer of the entire world. So let me cite and let me illustrate my point by giving some examples. The Aranyani Sukta of the Rig Veda praises the forest goddess Aranyani for her beauty and abundance. At the same time, it warns against careless felling of trees because they are essential to life. In a similar vein, the Prithvi Sukta of the Atharva Ved, it expresses a profound and earnest desire for fertile lands and peaceful surroundings by invoking the earth's forests, mountains, and water bodies as sources of well-being. The Taittiriya Upanishad highlights a fundamental interdependence between life and nourishment, which comes from plants and forests. Now these ideas celebrated worship of trees and preservation of sacred groves called Devavanas in Sanskrit, wherein deforestation as well as hunting were prohibited. So that's how our ancient Indian scriptures have conceptualized the environment. By protecting the biodiversity and the water systems, these Devavanas set the template and provided the models of early Indian conservation circuits centuries prior to the emergence of modern ecological theory and activism. Now, that was about the Vedic corpus on forests and environment. Interestingly, another text, Kautilya's Arthashastra, primarily a treatise on statecraft and political economy, offers a practical paradigm of maintaining and sustaining the forests. You are an expert on the Kautilya's Arthashastra yourself, so you would know that Kautilya divides and classifies forests into various kinds, such as elephant forests, timber forests, etc. Let me talk about elephant forests for a little bit. Elephant forests, also called Hastivanas, were important. Why? Because Mauryan Empire was the first empire in Indian history with a pan-Indian geographical spread. And how do we know this? Because Ashoka's inscriptions are found as far as Kandahar in Afghanistan and Shahbazgadi in Pakistan. So here you have a pan-Indian empire for the very first time in Indian history. And Mauryan Empire was also the first empire with a permanent standing army. Now, for a permanent standing army, for winning and for fighting and winning the battles, elephants were of utmost importance. So they needed to be protected, right? So herein we have Kautilya delineating that Hastivanas were particularly for royal use and purpose, and poaching was banned. Now, let me give you a very striking example of conservation, use and conservation. So Kautilya says that in these Hastivanas, severe penalties and punishments were to be imposed if one killed an elephant. At the same time, a person who brought tusks of an elephant which had died naturally, he was to be rewarded by the king in the court. So there is you find here there is in this interesting blend of conservation and use without exploitation, without environmental exploitation, without environmental harassment. So agreed that the state did harness and did use the forest resources, but at the same time, the state also emphasized on sustainability through measures like planting of appropriate species of flora and developing the water reservoirs. So I think it makes amply clear that the idea of forests and how beautifully conceptualized and envisioned in our ancient Indian textual tradition.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear, cut to centuries down the lane in 21st century. I'm sure it's worth thinking, what did we lose? So my next question basically is dependent on that. I mean, something was very functional centuries ago. The idea of so-called what we call bioreserves now, so-called ideas of sustainable use. We lost a lot of them. What do you think can we really use from what we already had in today's time? How do you think those ideas really can be adapted to dealing with the problems we're facing? I mean, we are almost mid of May and the temperatures are soaring. There's a climate change problem and everybody is facing it. So how do you think this ancient wisdom and ways of syncretic living with the environment can be replicated in today's time?
Wherein the idea of environmental conservation and preservation was so strong, and people considered and viewed forests as so intrinsic to their own life and existence. So I understand and acknowledge the growing pressures of urbanization, population explosion, which is leading to deforestation and the cutting of forests. But we also have to understand and realize that if there are no forests, there will be no us. So right now, what I can propose is that first, Vedic-inspired forest revival should move beyond symbolic plantation drives. It should move beyond mere tokenism to become a community-led and community-driven movement in which semi-government bodies and the masses have to come together. A nationwide network of Devavana Sanctuaries may be developed in different parts of the country as mini forest zones, which should be guided by the Vedic ecological principles of Rita, which means cosmic order, Dan, which means charity, and Karuna, which means compassion. Then I also propose and I also suggest that eco-ashramas or eco-gurukulas should be established that could function as training hubs where scientists, students, scholars, and community people could function together to develop regenerative forestry models that amalgamate ancient Indian wisdom as well as modern science. So NCERT is doing a lot in terms of environmental instilling and sort of seeping environmental consciousness into the textbooks. But I think it's time that it should move out of the classrooms and become a very fundamental feature of our own lived experiences and our own everyday reality. I think that's how we can learn from what our ancient Indian scriptures tell us about environment. So, for example, forests have been envisioned in the epics, varied and different meanings. For example, the Dandakaranyas, which means the forests that were a little tricky, forests that were a little difficult. And Lord Sri Ram, during his exile, spent most of his exile in these Dandakaranyas. Then we have the Vrindavanas, which were the forests rich in fruit-yielding trees and water bodies. So we have a place like Vrindavan associated with Lord Krishna, we all can imagine that why was it named Vrindavana? It must have been a forest full of fruit-bearing trees and abundance of water bodies. Similarly, Tapovanas, which was meant for ascetic penance. So, I mean, the ancient Indian world view was so expansive, it was so beautiful, it underlines a profound interconnectedness between man and nature, between man and environment. So it was man with environment, not man vis-a-vis environment. And because they envisioned everything, forest and trees, as their own children and as their own guardians. So I think we can learn, and particularly the Gen Z can learn a lot by these ancient Indian scriptures. And what we need to do is just look back at them, and they are certainly going to yield a lot of information and knowledge. Thank you so much.
I think that's a fantastic idea to think about. I mean, even the framers of the Constitution, that reminds me, used to talk about the same thing. I mean, when Mahatma Gandhi very famously says that, the planet has enough to satisfy everyone's need, but not anybody's greed.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting way to be looking at it. And I think from everything that you mentioned, even if we're able to emulate, bring to our lives some portion of it, a lot can be changed, and not just for India, but for the entire world and the universe at large, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
I think I would like to close our session with this wonderful idea that the customs and the culture that we've been growing up with, it's best that we try to understand and make it more contemporarily relevant, so that we are able to live with everything that is existing on the planet that we have been born on, rather than making it, like Abhishek rightly pointed out, man and woman versus the planet that we are living on. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for those wonderful ideas. And I think we'll be happy to have all of you join us for the next segment of this podcast. I would request all of you to please keep following us, liking us, subscribing our channel, and see you again. Namaskar. Thank you so much.